Oh, this is gonna be crazy.
Okay, destroy the building.
Alright, so hello everyone and welcome to another edition of SpraynPray1000's Verdict. I am SpraynPray1000 and today we are going to talk about Sword Art Online Lost Song. Really quickly, I want to put a disclaimer at the front. I'm actually not playing the American version of this game because the American version doesn't come out until November 17th, 2015. The version I got is actually the Asian English version. It came out a little bit earlier in May, I think on May 12th. And so, any differences or anything, again, it's on a different console entirely than what's coming to America. So really, this is a little bit of a different verdict because of that. But anyway, Lost Song is a sequel to Sword Art Online Hollow Fragment, which is in itself the remake and expansion to Sword Art Online Infinity Moment. So this makes it the third Sword Art Online game. It's the first one to come to a home console instead of being on a portable one. And it revolves around Kirito and his friends exploring a new expansion to ALO or Alfheim Online called Svart Alfheim, and their adventures there and thus what takes place. So the game starts out pretty similarly to Infinity Moment and to Hollow Fragment. It's not like you start out at level 1. You actually, generally, all your characters start out at level 100, and as you get more characters, they scale them up to higher levels. And right off the bat, what I'll say is, unlike Hollow Fragment, which kind of focused on being an MMO, very, very much tries to simulate an MMO at a lot of different points, to kind of give the feeling of you're actually playing one. ALO completely almost gets rid of that at some points in favor of a more action-oriented, more offline style of game. So you won't feel like you're playing an MMO really when you're playing Lost Song. And they've kind of removed that aspect. Whether that's good or bad is really kind of up to you. But let's start out with the story first. The story of this game, as I said, Kirito and his friends are exploring this new area. It's interesting. There's a couple of new characters that they add in, already building off of the new characters that were added into Hollow Fragment. They return, as well as some other new characters. And as a sequel, it's pretty good. They address Hollow Fragment at a lot of different points. They have a lot of stuff owing back to it. And it's pretty cool that they put all that in and, they made it work, and that all runs out very nicely. Additionally, the one thing that I'll say that was a real problem with Hollow Fragment on launch is that the translation of this game, the Asian English version, of course, is already basically perfect English. There's a few quips here or there, a few minor mistakes, but it's nothing like how Hollow Fragment was on launch day, where it was almost, unreadable in a lot of aspects. So they did a good job with the translation, and this isn't even the official English release, so I mean, it could only... I don't even know how much they could improve it. It's basically almost done, I'd say. But that's good that they hammered that one out very nicely, so that way you can get more into the game. And the world, the world building and the exposition a lot of the game and how the system works and, how the game plays out is pretty good. It's pretty interesting. And some of the characters are really well written for this game, I feel. Others kind of not so much, but some of them are really, really well elaborated on and explained. And that's good, coming from Hollow Fragment, where a lot of the times most character exposition that wasn't Kirito was basically some sort of harem event, revolving around him and his attention and whatnot, which I kind of didn't like too much about that game. Now, unfortunately, the story has some negatives to it. The story itself is pretty sparse, and it's pretty quick to resolve its own issues. Like, the story does not, it's not too much, for the main story at least, there's not very much of it, and when it, the big plot twists kind of all come, almost at once at the end, So there's no like, okay, I play 20%, there's a plot twist, and I play 50, there's another one. This game kind of just hammers out all the hard stuff at the end, right before the final boss, which is a little bit annoying, and it's a little bit sad. They couldn't have tried to add more stuff to it. And the real reason I think that the story suffers in this aspect is because the game itself is not very long at all. I mean, sure, there's all the talking events, the visual novels, the side mission events, which are also have their own visual novels parts of it, and that's basically what the cutscenes are in this game. They're visual novels for those of you who don't know, instead of actual cutscenes here or there or whatever. But the game is very short. There's only 4 islands to explore in the entire game. And I was a little bit disappointed. A little bit would be an understatement. I was very disappointed that there were only 4 islands. Now, each island is pretty big, but it's the kind of big where there's not really much in it. And that's part of the problem with this game, is that they made these great big lush environments, and then they made it so that, okay, the caves can only be done in a certain order. There's really like no reason to explore the environment, other than just, general curiosity or farming monsters. And even then, it's just like most of the areas are just blank, regions with a lot of monsters that you can just simply fly by on your way from point A to point B. And that's a little bit annoying because, I mean, in Hollow Fragment, there was a great sense of exploration. There was a reason to go out of your way to see what was around every corner, because there could be a good item or there could be a tough monster that if you kill gives you a big experience boost. And in this game, the fact that there's only four islands and, that's it, is kind of a little bit meh. I feel they could have spaced out a lot of this stuff more, added more story to it, made it more conclusive, more solid. Because the way it feels a little bit to me is like you have a lot at the beginning, a lot at the end, and then a little bit here or there trickled in. And that's kind of the story of this game, which is a little bit annoying, I feel. And I wish there was more stuff to do on these islands, like maybe throw in a monster that's real tough, but also there's a reason to kill it. Throw in more quests that are, not just fetch quests. Throw in a lot of other stuff. Modernize the game a little more in these aspects, and give a reason to explore these areas, and don't make the caves linear. Or if you're gonna have linear caves, add a lot more that you would want to explore. Don't just make the only caves on the island story based, and you can only do them in a certain order. Because really, when you play an MMO and you play a game like it, or even not even just an MMO, just any game like this, you want to explore. It's an adventure game. Exploration is a very important part of that. And if there's really nothing to explore, it's almost just a linear game with the pretense that you can go, you can idle as much as you want in certain areas. So for the story, it's good where it is, but there's not enough of it because the game is too short. And that's one of the biggest problems. I was hoping that there would be at least like 6 or 7 islands, that would be really interesting. Because really what they do in this game is, after a certain point, they make you double back onto the islands you've already been to do like 2 more dungeons on each island, which is a little bit of a cop-out, I feel. I mean, I get why it makes sort of sense in the story, but it's a little bit of a cop-out that they just simply reuse those areas, when one, there already wasn't much to do in them anyway, and now they just reuse them, just to kind of extend it a bit. I was really hoping, that there would be 6 or 7. So the story is, like a pass. Like it's in between like a pass and okay. Now the gameplay is where Lost Song has really been revolutionized compared to its predecessors. The gameplay is no longer like an MMO where you do auto attacks, there's aggroing and stuff like that. As I said, this game plays a little bit more like, say, like Dragon Age, or a more actiony RPG, something that involves a little bit less MMO style planning and a lot more action-based reactionary combat. So first off, the combat is faster paced. You'll kill monsters quicker than you will in, say, like Hollow Fragment. Like, you won't have a fight that takes you like 5 minutes to win, and you got to manage this and manage that, unless it's a boss fight, which will take you. I'll get to that in a little bit. But I mean, in general, fighting in this game is a lot faster and more involving. Instead of having auto attack, you now have light and heavy attacks, which are now used. Heavy attacks consume stamina, which is a new resource that you have. Alternately, there's two stances each character can have: a melee stance where they use their equipped weapon to swing at the enemy, or a magic stance where they put their weapon away and they cast magic. And now the magic system in this game, I'll give it props, is very good, very interesting, and there's a lot to it. For example, there's 6 different elements. There's fire, water, earth, wind, light, and dark. And then there's also bonus spell trees like familiars, which are minions that certain characters can use. There's also song, which is limited to a few characters. There's also special, which pertains to each character and their race. So, for example, some characters might be more of a support style, where they might be able to enhance the party's weapons with various elements. Other characters might be more caster based, where they learn a lot of different spells of varying levels. Even more characters will still have other things that they can do, like more melee oriented moves, more aggro gathering based moves. And that's pretty interesting that they diversified the characters, because in Hollow Fragment, other than Kirito, every character was just kind of an extension like of a certain aspect. So some characters were really good at one thing and that was it, and that's all they could do, and they can only equip one type of weapon. Lost Song completely erases that, and adds in multiple weapons people can equip, adds in tons of new stuff, and that's really awesome, and I like that a lot about this game. Is that the good character diversity, and you can diversify your party a lot better. By the way, parties in this game are now 3 people as opposed to Hollow Fragment's 2, which one of them mandatorily had to be Kirito in Hollow Fragment. In this game, every character gets the same treatment. You can play as any character you want from the list of the roster of playable characters. A lot of guest characters also appear, like a lot of the characters that were kind of glanced over in the show or the anime also appear, which is pretty good. You can also issue commands such as positioning to your teammates. So, for example, if you have a magic style user, you want to keep them a little bit out of the fray, as it would be. You can issue them to, stay back, and, maybe if the other person's a more melee oriented character, you can tell them to go in and go get it, which is pretty good. Again, each character can equip 3 different types of weapons. So, for example, Kirito can equip 2 swords, which allows him to dual wield, which is his signature stat. He can equip one-handed swords, and he can also equip 2-handed swords. Whereas another character like Asuna can use like rapiers, can use maces, and can use other things. And that's generally how every character is, and that's good. I like that. And also, one of the biggest things that they've added is that since ALO focuses on fairies and a lot of flight-based stuff, in this game you can fly around with wings. Every character has the ability to enter something called flying and floating mode. Now, walking mode is as it sounds. You walk on the ground in general. You just run around like you would normally do in any other game. But by pushing left or right on the D-pad, you're able to enter floating mode, which allows you to adjust your altitude, and you can go up, you can go down, you can travel, a little faster than you would be able to on the ground, which is pretty good. And again, if you've seen the show, you already kind of are familiar with what I'm talking about. And it's a nice addition to this game because it gives depth to the map. It gives you a reason to want to explore different elements and different elevations and different floating islands, see if there's anything up there. Unfortunately, as I said, there's never really much, which is the unfortunate part. And then lastly, there's flying mode, which is basically how you travel quickly around the world map. You continuously move forward and you can adjust your speed, and that's generally it. Now, let's get into the negatives, and unfortunately, there's a fair bit of negatives. They're not all horrible, but altogether, they kind of detract from the game immensely in some aspects. First off, let's actually start from the bottom of my list over here. First off, you cannot float or fly in dungeons, which is kind of annoying, because a lot of times in dungeons you'll be fighting monsters that fly, that move very quickly, and the only real way for you to kind of deal damage to them is to wait for them to stop moving or to use magic. And a lot of times they can just dodge the magic also, which is annoying. And it's really kind of lame that they have that in the game, where you cannot float in dungeons. And because of that, enemies can almost kind of kite you immensely. until eventually they run into something and you can catch up. So that's annoying, and especially when there's, say a boss or anything like that, it gets really annoying that you can't do that. Additionally, floating mode combat is a little weird. It's really not that perfected. It feels kind of bare bones, which is the problem. And a lot of times I found myself just wanting to just fight on the ground, just completely ignore the fact that there's floating mode wherever possible, try to lure enemies to a height that I could hit them with or hit them on from the ground, and just do that. And I felt that that was a bit better in a lot of instances, as opposed to trying to whiff attacks and hit them in the air as a melee character, of course. Now, one cool thing is that the boss fights are gigantic. The frame rate doesn't drop really, and in general, the boss fights have a lot more to them than, say, Hollow Fragment, which in general had a lot of repetitive, simple boss fights. All the bosses essentially could be beat by the exact same tactic of, circling around them, avoiding their attacks, blah, blah, blah. In this game, it's a little bit better, but on the flip side, one of the things that they added was the ability to target specific limbs in a boss fight. Unfortunately, you can't actually target the limbs. I was unable to actually switch my target to the limbs at all. Now, they do a soft kind of lock-on, which is mainly for magic, that allows you to aim your magic at multiple targets, including the one that you're locked on to. But I mean, if you're trying to go for a melee-oriented character or a melee-oriented build, it's really kind of pointless because you can't hard lock on to, say, the weak point of the boss. So a lot of times I just ended up free aiming and free fighting the bosses. And the bosses in and of themselves are still kind of damage sponges. They just kind of do whatever and they just soak up a ton of damage, and that's really kind of all there is to it. And I wish there was a little bit more diversity in that aspect. But yeah, the targeting system really doesn't help that much. You can't really lock on to the various boss fights. I mean, they do soft lock it, but again, that's not very helpful for melee characters. Another thing that they did in this game is they basically removed all stats. There's really no stats for any of your characters. There's the attack stat, the defense stat, the elemental attack, which is the elemental damage you deal when attacking normally, and the elemental resistance, and that's it. There's no dexterity, for instance, no vitality. You can't, everything is kind of based around items. So if you want to up your health, you have to equip an item that does it. You can't, like, find a piece of armor, or you can't, put points into it. They've really removed that system from Hollow Fragment, which is a little bit annoying, I feel. I like that system that, it did kind of simulate an MMO, what you would expect from a fantasy RPG like that. And it's really unfortunate, I feel. I really wish that they would have brought that back and added it and implemented it in a better way. But again, the shortness of the game probably contributed to that. There's really almost no point. Another thing that really kind of confused me as to why they would do it is they would add something like elemental resistance. It seems to me like half the time you can't even really tell what elemental resistance enemies have because A, they don't really ever use magic. There's very few enemies in the game that use magic. Or B, they use melee all the time. I feel like most of the time it's just straight up damage. It's not anything elemental. So really, I almost feel like the elemental stat is kind of a complete waste, and there's really no point to it. So, in my opinion, that entire stat was completely worthless. There wasn't really much to it. It wasn't, thought out very well because most of the time you can just completely ignore it. So that's a little bit disappointing, I feel, that there's really nothing else to do with the elemental stuff. I mean, for characters, yeah, you can have whatever elemental you want, but it doesn't really seem like elements really affect much in the game. Unlike other games where you can clearly tell you're hitting a monster with a critical hit if you use fire magic on it or something. In this game, it kind of almost all feels the same. So it's kind of a redundant stat. You cannot switch the leader while in combat or out in the field, and that's kind of a derivative of my main issue, which is you cannot issue direct commands to your teammates. Like, you can issue positioning, but like if you need your healer to heal constantly, of which there's really only like 2 healers in the game, by the way. If you need your healer to heal, you can't tell them, hey, use heal. You can't really influence that at all. It's kind of up to their AI, whatever their AI feels. And I mean, the AI in this game is pretty decent. Like, it's not stupid. But on the flip side of that, it also kind of doesn't know what to do in some cases. So like one teammate will be getting completely hammered, and unless the actual healer takes damage or unless that person gets to dangerously low levels, they won't even begin to heal it. And sometimes, a teammate could get one-shotted because of that, because they have no health and they could have gotten healing, 10 seconds prior that would have helped them. But yeah, that's a little bit of a minor complaint, I feel, because the AI does take care of itself decently, but nonetheless, it is still a little bit annoying. I wish that they had kind of given this game a more Dragon Age-esque kind of a way to do combat, like where you can pause combat and issue commands and whatnot. Um, but all in all, I feel that the game has been oversimplified. I feel that they removed a lot of stuff from the game, like for instance, as I just said, issuing commands, which you could vaguely do in Hollow Fragment. Like you could tell them to use a sword skill. Again, in Hollow Fragment, it didn't really matter what you did. You could tell them to get back. You can tell them to attack. All this kind of stuff. And they kind of just removed it in this game. And while the AI does do a decent job, there's certain instances where I wish there was more to it. And lastly, there's long loading times in this game. A ton of long loading times. Well, I wouldn't say super long, but I mean, again, this game does take a while to load one area to the next, which can be a little bit annoying, a little bit of a peeve. It's more of an annoyance than a real complaint. And the other thing is that the main town feels so dead. There's really, in my opinion, like Hollow Fragment had a main town that, yeah, the frame rate would suffer a little bit at some points if there were a lot of people on screen, but there were 3 different areas you could walk between, each one offering different services and things, and you would have, actual AI walk around town and act like they're doing stuff. They would sit down, they would fall asleep, they would eat stuff, stuff like that. That just doesn't return in this game. Like, there's like one person running around town and everyone else is standing around doing nothing. And I feel that could have been immensely, improved on considering what the predecessor did. Additionally, for whatever reason, they only made like 10 character models that weren't unique characters. So you'll see the same people in cutscenes. Like literally, you'll see duplicate people in cutscenes. And that to me just feels like super weird. Like I don't understand why they did that. The same 5 people are in every cutscene because they didn't make various different people in it. And I feel that really detracts from the immersion aspect of the game. The MMO style of the game has kind of suffered because of that. And that unfortunately really kind of takes away from it. And additionally, the controls I feel could have been a bit better done. I don't know why, but when you're in floating mode, pressing X makes you go up, but double tapping X will make you descend as opposed to, a button. And L2 is kind of worthless in story mode. It's done mainly for multiplayer to like quick chat, but I feel that in story mode at the very least, it's completely pointless because your AI will not react to it. It's just kind of there. They just made a general control scheme for multiplayer and single player, and regardless of how effective one was in the other, that's just how it works. Now the multiplayer is fun. Don't get me wrong. I did find that the few missions I did online were pretty good, but I mean, that's it. Like, there's really not much for the game, and I really feel that the game kind of suffers in that aspect from numerous points. So, like, as I said, like, yeah, the combat's faster paced, you level up real quick, you learn stuff, but I mean, you learn abilities, enemies don't really have elemental weaknesses that's that effective. You level up, I mean, the combat's faster paced, but you can't issue orders. The gameplay is very repetitive after a certain point of, just basically, using heavy attack. The bosses are damage sponges that, you can't really hit the specific limbs to deal big damage to. That said, though, the bosses are pretty easy in this game. Like, I was able to beat the end game stuff, which is incredibly high level, with some difficulty, mainly because I was a lower level, but nothing too major. I was able to do most of the main stuff in the game, which is cool. But lastly, I'm going to end this on a good note. The graphics of this game are great. Once again, you have another anime-style game, or a game based off of an anime that just really comes to life when it's in 3D. Like, Namco Bandai always does this, like with the Tales games, with the Sword Art games, with all the different style of games they put out. The Naruto games especially, they always have the best toolkit and the best dev kit that really allows them to bring these anime style games to life, and they look amazing. Like, this game looks great, and everything is really well done about it. And the CGI cutscenes are beautiful, just like they were in Lost Song. they were beautiful in Hollow Fragment. They were beautiful, and they really well done. Anima Incorporated really did a great job bringing them to life. The only thing I wish is that there were more of them. I wish that there were more cutscenes where, they had these kind of cutscenes things. There's 4 in the beginning and 2 in the end, and that's it. That's the entirety of it, which is a little bit of a disappointment, I feel. The soundtrack is very well done. I will say that there's 2 songs in this soundtrack which are absolutely amazing. They're great. They're some of my all-time favorites when it comes to video game soundtracks because of how well done they are. But there's not a lot of songs because again the game is very short when you get down to it. Like there's not a lot of areas. So really, the main complaint about this game is that it's too repetitive and it's too short. Now, again, the story will take you a long time if you read through the visual novel segments and you do all the side stuff and you grind, and try to level up your people. But I mean, other than that, when you get down to it, the main story of it is pretty short. Like there's not too much to bite on, I feel, if you just go right ahead and do the main story. So ultimately, what would I give Lost Song? I mean, it's good where it's good, but it's pretty bad in a lot of aspects. And even where it's good, there's a lot of negatives to it. So unfortunately, I'm going to have to give Lost Song a 79 out of 100. It's good. It's not amazing, but it gets the job done. And if you like the anime, it's going to be pretty interesting, especially if you played Hollow Fragment and you're liking this timeline. It's got some good stuff to it. It's got some replayability. It's got New Game Plus, which is always a good thing I like to see in RPGs. So you can replay things, and it's got a good experience. It's got a good feel, but there's a lot of negatives that kind of sheer away from what it could have really been, which would have really wowed me and really impressed me. So unfortunately, Lost Song, I mean, the thing is, because most of my viewers, I imagine, are, American, and they're not going to import it. If you want to get Lost Song, it costs $60 to import, but what I would say is go on PSN and see if you can still get the bundle for pre-ordering it, which gets you Hollow Fragment on the PS4 for free. Even if you own Hollow Fragment on the Vita, at least that bundle is worth the $60 because Hollow Fragment has been enhanced and slightly edited for the PS4. And you'll get so basically you get Hollow Fragment, which is a $20 game on PS4. Standalone, you get that, and you pay, again, about $40 for Lost Song, which is a good deal. It's what I would say, yeah, if you're really into it, it's worthwhile. So totally go for it. So otherwise, I mean, if you're not a fan of the anime, I mean, I don't know what to tell you. Like, it's probably not going to appeal to you that much. I mean, Hollow Fragment is probably one of the more unique JRPGs because, again, of the way it works. But Lost Song is kind of a more generic hack and slasher, with not that many RPG aspects to it. So, I mean, really, if you're not a fan of the anime or you're not at least familiar with it, you probably won't enjoy yourself too much. But yeah, that's going to be it for this verdict. I am SpraynPray1000, a 79 out of 100 for Lost Song, and it's worthwhile if you're a fan. So, see you next time for the next one, and take it easy.